welcome everybody to episode 13 of The Female Perspective from MXP Magazine. I'm your host, Jackie Reese, joined by Melody Hodgson this week. Melody, how are you doing?
I'm doing amazing. Thanks for having me, Jackie. It's nice to finally meet you face to face via a screen, but it's better than nothing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining me. I'm very
Welcome.
excited about this podcast, and I want to start at the beginning here, like I do most of the time. Uh, how were you introduced to motorcycling? How'd you get into the sport?
Um, Back in early 2000s, I was living in a small town called Atikokan, which is about 2 hours west of Thunder Bay. It's kind of not far from the Minnesota border. And I was heavily involved in volunteering for things for fun, and there were motocross races up there. So around that age, I would have been 20 or so. And if we're being honest, the town Atikokan had around 3,000 people there, and motocross races brought in boys. So I said, I'm going to start volunteering there. That's how it started. So I started helping out and just fell in love with the sport. Met some really great people that I'm still friends with to this day. And 2005, I picked up an issue of Racer X, and that's when the Racer X Canada insert was in there, and realized that there was a whole kind of Canadian scene that I didn't even know existed in regards to the nationals. So I looked at the schedule and emailed Jan Stallybrass at the time, who is Mark Stallybrass's wife and ran CMRC, and said, "Hey, I want to come volunteer and learn how to make races better up here." And they said, "Come on down to Go for Dunes." So Go for Dunes 2015 or 2005 was my first national, and I just by luck knew the computer program they were using for the race software, because that's what we used up in Atikokan. And the girl that was doing the West was not continuing out East, and they said, "Hey, do you want to do the next few rounds?" And I said, "Absolutely, I do." And I just stuck around. That was it. I never moved back home. I moved to Toronto, and here I am. So,
Wow, that's wild. So
yeah.
you knew this computer software and it worked out perfectly. What
hmm
other kinds of things did you volunteer to do during that time?
Up north, just like I love putting on events. That's kind of what my passion is, I guess, if I had to like label it. So we just there was like bass tournaments and just volunteer things. Basically, it's going to make me sound like super flighty, but anything that was a great time, I loved being involved in. So, and that's kind of been the theme. I mean, we have motocross here that we do, but we're busy the rest of the year running events throughout the community. So, yeah, I've kind of kept that thread going.
That's cool. Speaking of cute boys here, how'd you meet Brett and how'd you get connected with Walton Raceway?
So when I came down in 2005, Jan said, when you get to Go for Dunes, ask for Brett Lee. And I'm going to try and phrase this in a way that doesn't make it seem like I am a country bumpkin, or I was at the time. But the last name Lee, I assumed he was of Asian descent. So I went to Go for Dunes, and I'm looking and I'm like, okay. So I walk up to these, I got pointed in the direction of these two guys, walked up, and I was like, "Oh, hi, I'm looking for Brett Lee." And this guy said, "Oh, I'm Mark," and shook my hand. I'm like, whoopity doo dah day. Okay, like you're Mark. And then Brett was right beside him, and it turns out that was Mark Stallybrass. So I just felt like a real special, unaware person at that time. So we met and we worked together. Obviously, he was managing the amateur side of things, and he was, I forget his official title with the national series, but he was at every round. So we started dating, I think, 2007-ish type thing. And then, I mean, obviously he's connected to Walton, so that's how I ended up here. So Walton was actually the first really big track that I had ever heard about. Everyone talked about the natural double up north, and it was kind of mythical. So it was neat to finally come down, and now I look at it every day when I have my coffee, and it's kind of, yeah, naturalized a bit, but
That's awesome. So, for people that might not know the full history of Walton
mhm.
Raceway, including myself,
Yep.
it's a family business to my understanding. What's the whole
Yes.
story there?
So Walton Raceway, we're coming up on our 50th year for the facility this year. So Brett's dad, Chris, started it back in 72. And it was just, it looks totally different now. I mean, it's obviously, it's hard to imagine a little bit, but it used to be cow pastures. and then they started racing on the grass back then, and it was called the Maitland Dirt Riders was the first association. And then it grew. We're coming up on our 30th year of Transcan, so we had 1 year off. So about 32 years ago, probably Brett and his brother Matt and their dad Chris went down to Loretta's for the first time and said, wow, we need something like this up in Canada. And they came up, and a few years later, we had the first Transcan. So that's the short story.
That's awesome. You're obviously very involved now at this point. What is your role
Mhm.
there? What kind of things do you take on a daily basis?
I guess my email tag says I am the sponsor relations person. So I mostly deal with the sponsors, making sure that we fulfill our contracts with them. But as with any small business, 90% of the time it's just Brett and I that are running things. We have our summer staff that come in seasonally. So entries, facilitating, requests, just anything administration wise, that's also on my plate. And then I manage all the design stuff for the facility as well. So any of the signs, installations, merchandise you're wearing, that all comes from this computer that I'm staring at right now. So it's a lot, but it's creative, and that's what I love. I love anything that is creative because the beehive is always buzzing, and I get if I get bored, then I become disengaged really quickly. So creativity allows me to maintain my interest in anything that I'm doing. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm the same way. If I'm bored, I was that kid that would, screw around in class and,
Yeah.
but if I had things to do, I was totally fine. So
Yeah,
totally
I'm a
get you there.
daydreamer. I just daydream all the time. So I'm learning now that that can be a sign of like ADHD. I always thought that was it was always hyperactive, but
Mhm.
I'm 40 this year. This is who I am, and I'm living with it.
Yeah, right. And who's to say there's anything wrong with it, right? Like,
No, I'm
it's
like
brought you so
yeah,
much.
it
Yeah.
has. It really has. So that's, I love I like that perspective on it.
Absolutely. So we mentioned the Walton Transcan, the
Yep.
largest Canadian amateur motocross event of the year.
hmm
Similar format as Loretta Lynn's here in the United States. What goes into preparing for an event like that? You've mentioned all these hats that you wear, all these different things that you do.
hmm
Uh, little insider perspective into that large event, what goes on in the weeks going up to it, or, year round maybe.
Year round. It's year round. I feel like we're planning for the next Transcan as the current Transcan is going on. So, but that's the nature of the beast. Transcan, I find, is what I'm most passionate about in this business. I do love all the events we do, but the Transcan is, I love it a little bit more. So it's just that accumulation of everything you work hard towards or work hard for all year round, not just us, but all the riders, and just having that ability to celebrate it and have acknowledge the hard work that they put into things, whether or not they're on that top step or not. I mean, it's their moment to kind of to have the whole industry looking at them and to be able to provide them with that platform. It feels super fulfilling to me. And I love it. I look forward to it all year round. So the prep, like I said, it never stops. Brett and I, you always hear Mel and Brett, or specifically Brett. Sometimes I get mentioned. If I don't, that's fine. But we have a whole crew behind us that actually make this happen. And it's not just us. We just get to be the faces in front of it. But we have like our facility manager, Barry, and then, Barnsey and Ron, our medics. And I don't want to start naming people because I'll forget them and then I'll feel really horrible about it. But the planning never stops. So Brett and I have our coffee in the morning. And then we usually lay in bed at night and talk about our day a little bit. So it's consuming in a really good way. There are moments probably where I just want to check out a little bit, I'll be honest with you, but it really never stops, which sounds cliche. I will acknowledge that, but it doesn't. So
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can really relate it to here that I've experienced is preparing for the Millville Pro National. So
hmm
that's my local track. That's what I relate to. And, I go down there during the week before the Nationals coming up and I paint the gates. And there's
yeah.
people painting signs and weed whacking and all this,
hmm
all these things that you don't think about needs to be done. So it sounds like you guys have a great team, handling all these things that are easy to overlook.
Yes, and now we have Walton One as well, which so we like to keep things different from Walton One to Transcan, just so it's extra special for those amateurs coming in. So it's extra work, double the work, but it's fine. It's good.
Yeah.
And we usually have last year I had to put up signs myself, and I'm going to be honest with you, Jackie, I have soft hands. So they're like after a day of pounding steaks, and I picked the driest and hardest time to do it. So they went in maybe that much. I ended up with like tore up hands, and all my signs blew over the next day. So
No.
I have officially assigned that task to other people because it's just not for me. But yeah, it's everything. It's all those little things that just always look like they're here, but it takes someone doing them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You need a little jug of water next time you send someone out to put the steaks in.
I know.
Uh,
Oh, it was so embarrassing. So I tried. I
That's all
tried.
right. That's all right. So this event has been happening for about 30 years now.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest changes that you've seen over the 30 years?
I would say the biggest for me personally is what I look for is how clean it looks. And not just like visually like garbage and everything. I just mean the design of it and the layout and the sponsorship signs and just how kind of professional it looks is really that's what we I take the most pride in is how that's changed for me. How it's changed on a competition level is the last year. So I'll back up a bit. We had a year off, 2017. We didn't have the national, the amateur national. So it took a bit to build up the classes again. So the first year back, 2018, everyone kind of took a chance on us. Would we be able to pull this off? I think that was the year we had off. Anyways, sorry, all these years combined together.
Mhm.
Um, and then it took a bit to build up those classes, but the biggest change from that point in time to last year was the depth of the racing across the country. So it wasn't just Ontario riders coming in or riders, within a couple hour driving distance provincially. It was all across the country. And that's the whole point of the TransCan. It's Trans Canada. It's to have that competition on a unified level. And that's the biggest change for me over the past few years is seeing that come back to where it was. And I mean, the gate entries this year are super strong again, and they're from all across the country. So it's exciting for us to see that change, that growth again, because it was missing for so many years. And the commitment of those riders who are on the East and West Coast to come out here, it's really, it's rewarding. And that's probably for me on the competition level, what I've seen the most change in a
Absolutely.
positive way.
Absolutely. I'm not trying to get too political here, but
It's okay.
how do you think COVID has impacted, that increase again, maybe now that life's becoming a
hmm
bit more normal, or how's that affected the Transcan over the past few years?
Um, so while it was happening that first year, when everything was up in the air and we had so many complaints against us, and our whole community kind of turned, and then we had daily inspections. Inspections. I had to meet with the police and paramedics and everyone and do walkthroughs with them. As it was happening, it was not fun. I cried a lot. Like it was very devastating, finding out what your community members thought of you in that time. Uh, it wasn't great, I'll be honest. There was a video of me crying and looking like uh, a crazy person a little bit, but in hindsight, COVID has been the best thing to happen to us as an industry and as a business in the sense that it allowed people the time to figure out what it is they wanted to do and what it was that brought them joy to do it. So fortunately for us, for a lot of people, that was riding dirt bikes. And it was that time with family. And it was just it afforded people the ability to take the time because there wasn't the rat race anymore, right? Like you still had your job, you could work from home, you had this freedom, and that freedom allowed people to come here. And I hope it stays the same. I hope people still take that time, choose that time for themselves and come to these races again because it just the racing community itself has grown to such a level that we've been dreaming of this for years as an industry. We're like, how do we get this many people racing? How do we make this happen? And the answer was COVID who would have thought a pandemic would be what we needed, but it was. So yeah, in the mix of it, it was not fun, but in hindsight, I'm very appreciative of what COVID has given us. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way. You know,
Hmm.
it gave them time to figure out what was important to them, what made them happy, like you said.
Yeah.
And when I was up in 2019, the Transcan was the most fun week I had the whole time I was up there. Like,
I love
just
that.
everyone's running around on golf carts. You know,
Yeah.
you're going to take a shower, but like, oh, this rooster's waking me up in the morning at 7 a.m., so I can't stay up too late. No, it's so much fun, and you
Yeah.
know, you just. I, all the time, I just say I wish everyone knew this community existed because it's
Hmm.
given me so much and so much happiness that, okay,
Yeah.
maybe you don't want to ride, but just be a part of it and just love the people like this.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I hope I never have to wear a mask in our fields again. That I look back on that from 2 years ago and I'm like, what kind of madness was that? We were outside, but um it was worth it for sure that we could definitely do this. And I find, just going back on your point that you said about this community, it's different than any other sport community I've been a part of in the past. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because it's such a wide range. Hockey, you start off little, and then by the time you're 14 or so, half your team peters out because they want to go partying or do other things. But with this, it's just such a wide age range of people who are together at all times that it's almost transcends the age barrier a little bit. I don't know.
Hmm.
It's hard to explain, but it's why it
Yeah,
makes it so special. Yeah.
I agree. And I think, you know, we all know how much money and time and
Hmm.
dedication we all put into it, how much promoters put into it to give us this opportunity to go ride. I think everybody gets that. And so you have this amount
Yeah.
of respect for people because you know that they work hard too. And I think that goes a long
Yeah.
way.
I like that a lot, just acknowledging that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Thank you. So you do all these things for motocross, the sport in
Hmm.
general. Why do you have this passion? Is it just your roots in it, or why have you continued to do this year after year after year?
I just love the people so much. The best people, some of the best people I've met in my life are a part of this industry, and I maybe only see them once a year, but I just look forward to that moment all year round. I'm trying not to cry. I don't know what's happening here. But that's it. I mean, honestly, I don't even race. I can't even ride a bike really. We have a couple 110s here, and I said to Brett last summer, I'm like, oh, I think I want just some lessons to feel more comfortable on it. He's like, you're fine. And then he rode behind me from one side of the property to the other, and he's like, okay, maybe we need some lessons. So it's just not. I'm not like interested in it for myself personally. My daughter, she will bomb around on it, has no interest in racing whatsoever. So it's kind of funny that we run this event and have this facility and underutilize it personally.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, that's it. It's just the people. I love it so much. I love the people so much. A lot
Yeah.
of them. Yeah.
And I think that's a pretty common theme with all these people that I talk to. You love it because of the people, right? Like the sport's
Hmm.
fun, of course.
Yeah.
But anything that you do, a job, you know, you take your kid to swimming lessons, like you go back because you like the people there that made an impression on you. So I think that's, you know, a super important point to make.
Yeah. We're 17 years and counting. So obviously it was a pretty good impression.
Uh, so, as a woman in this sport, how do you
Mhm.
feel the dynamic differs for you compared to maybe men that are in a similar position that you're in?
Yeah, uh there are differences for sure. And there's like a two-part answer to this. So I'll give the appreciative part. So I am very fortunate to be surrounded by people in this industry who pro- give me respect. Like it's a good exchange of respect, right? So um, Brett never fails to acknowledge the work I do or my involvement in everything we do. And then the men I get to work with on a professional level are identical, right? So we have great relationships with the other tracks, with Kevin Tyler and Derek Schuster and Ryan Gauld. And I always feel like I'm treated the same as, or maybe like a little bit better than what they would treat Brett type thing. But there's the level of respect there that just exists naturally. And then professionally too, I mean, JC sites with Fox, everyone, I never feel like when we're talking, they are going to hang up the phone and then call Brett and just ask for, confirmation of the things I've given instructions to or mentioned, which happens in this industry sometimes and outside of it. But I'm just fortunate to not experience it extensively. And if I do experience it, it's very short-lived because, like I said, I'm 40 this year, and I have a voice and I use it. And I have very little capacity for fragile male ego, or just fragile ego in general, I guess. Um, and it's not super common for me to experience, and that may be because I don't put myself in a position to experience it a lot. But I know it does exist for sure. 100% it exists. So that I'll give an example of one time last summer that sticks with me that's not really related to moto. It is a bit. So we have that bell tower that went up last summer, and they were doing work on it all year, and it was supposed to be done before July long weekend, and then it wasn't. And then we're coming up to Transcam, we're 2 weeks out. And there's this giant 5 foot wide trench that goes from the amateur stage all the way to the road. So it's just huge. And they're supposed to sod it. Nothing had happened. Not a big deal. So I just reached out and provided an email with like instructions, reminding them of their contractual obligations, all that stuff. And here's, timelines of the stuff has to happen type thing. No response. I go downstairs and I'm talking to Brett on the porch, and his phone rings, and it's the guy from the company. And he basically is just double checking that everything I said in the email was valid. And I'm like, I don't write emails just to practice typing. Like, there's a reason this is being sent. And, Brett was like, no, everything has to happen. And they were awesome and happened just like that. But it's just an example of sometimes men prefer to defer to men for decision making. And I mean, it's frustrating when it happens, but fortunately it's not super, super common. But
yeah, and I think that's a big difference between the US and Canada. Like the sense of respect increases in Canada, I feel like, compared
oh, does
to
it?
the US here. Yeah, I get a lot more, especially on the track. Like, I'll pass a guy. He'll see
Mm-hmm.
my ponytail and he will pin it to get back past me. He will risk his life. He'll be ready to die to pass me back because I have a ponytail. And so
Oh,
I totally get where you're coming from, but I feel like for both of us, like, we don't hang out with people like that because it would frustrate us. It wouldn't be
mm-hmm.
good for us. And so why would I keep this person around in my life, if I'm going to be treated without respect? So I totally get where you're coming from for sure.
Yeah. And sometimes, I mean, the situation occurs where you can't avoid it. And I mean, I always liken the CMA a bit. This is going to sound moto political here, but I liken the CMA a bit to like an old boys club, in the sense that they're who's affiliated with the FIM here. I don't know. And then, but everyone uses the national MRC. So the CMA though is in charge of some pretty important decision making when it comes to like Team Canada and whatnot. And it's frustrating for an industry such as ourselves, who are so involved in the day-to-day action in the sport, in the planning and the guidance and the direction of amateur and national motocross in this country. And then you have an old boys club like that kind of swoops in and makes decisions without any relevancy whatsoever. And they constantly choose men to represent them as opposed to women. And the women are held to a different standard than the men, definitely. When it comes to Team Canada, I'll just say it out loud. Like, the fact that Courtney Lloyd is not team manager because she was held to a completely different standard than the men that have done that role or are currently doing that role is like the most insane patriarchy, in my opinion, type thing.
So she was held to a
Yeah.
higher standard than the men who had that role?
um, I would say the expectation for a female in that role is to play by their rules and not question things and not be entirely strong-willed or strong-minded. And those rules don't apply to the men.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, it's frustrating. Yeah.
I've experienced some things like that where I have this great idea, right, and no one will hear me out, but I pass it on to the right guy, and that guy puts it out, and it's, oh, that's a great idea. So I feel
Hmm.
that, and it's a bummer, right, because it's this great
Hmm.
idea that I had. Um, but what I've found in my experience of volunteering in motocross stuff, it tends to be the women that actually act on those things.
Hmm.
So these guys will say, "Hey, that's a great idea. How about you go do it?" And so it's like, well, it was my idea in the first place, so I will act
Yes.
on my ideas here. But
Yes, I agree.
so it's just an interesting dynamic that
Yep.
maybe they don't mean to. Maybe that's how guys talk to other guys. Like, yeah, you should go do it, and then eventually they'll settle it themselves. However,
Hmm.
but it seems to be women that really want to take action on improving things.
Yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing men in
Of
any
course,
capacity because,
of
like I
course,
said, I'm surrounded by very supportive men.
yeah.
It's just there's certain situations that are incredibly frustrating, that seem to only apply to females as opposed to men, and it's shifting. It's definitely shifting. I noticed a shift even in my own daughter. Like, it took me many years to find my voice, and hers is loud, and she's 11, so, or 10. 10, I should know her age.
Yeah, yeah. It's right. That's why we have this podcast, is because it's
Hmm.
different. It's different for us because we are ladies and women, and our perspective, our experiences are different, and that's the point of sharing the stories, right?
Yeah, and it is a male dominated industry, so it's relevant. It's all relevant.
Absolutely. So this is an MXP Magazine
Hmm.
production here. How has your involvement with MXP Magazine developed over the years? I know you've written some articles and things like that.
Yeah, so Palms reaches out periodically to have me write some stuff, which I find I'm always surprised. I think it's just imposter syndrome, right? I'm like, who wants to hear what I have to say sometimes? But I'm always happy to do it. And then there were some things going on. You might not even know this, Jackie. I don't know. This winter, where Brett and I were presented with an opportunity to work towards ownership in MXP. So we're kind of, under the Walton Raceway umbrella, is transitioning to that. We just published the first issue under our kind of leadership a little bit. So that should be hitting mailboxes this week, as long as Canada Post cooperates and everything. So it's definitely advanced. It's developed a lot from writing a few articles to producing a magazine. And I will be the first one to admit I underestimated how much work it was. Wholly underestimated how much work and time went into that. And there's a whole new respect for anyone involved in that process. It was a lot, but it was super fulfilling.
Yeah. How did you guys come to the conclusion to take that on?
Um, I just feel like there was a transition with Charles Stancer happening, where he was looking to maybe move on to different things a little bit. And it wasn't, it wasn't super public at that time, but him and I both said, like, that's a great promotional tool for motocross in Canada, right? It'd be a real shame to lose it.
Hmm.
And they're always like, MXP has always been crazy supportive of everything we do in Walton as well. So we didn't want to lose that support for ourselves, but also support for the riders that participate in this event. So Brett reached out to Charles and broached the idea, and here we are. That was, I think, December, maybe. I don't even know. Time just blurs. So yeah, that's it.
Yeah. What were some of the things that you underestimated about the whole process?
Um, the amount of time it would take, in the sense that I wanted to put effort in. We didn't want to just take over ownership but not provide any, like, guidance or participation or input with it. So we were involved in every aspect of it. And the people we were working with, like Palms and James Lismore and Allison Kennedy, actually came back. It was super fun to work as a team together, but it took up a lot of time.
So, what's
All
been
right.
your favorite part about the whole thing so far? It's been a lot of work, but as you've said, it's been rewarding. What's been the best part of it so far?
I think the best part of it so far was seeing everyone else kind of really love what they were doing. So Allison Kennedy used to write for Racer Canada, and then we've kept in touch with her over the years, and then just giving her the opportunity to come back and write a piece about Tanner Scott and his 9 for 9, the bronze boot at this year's Transcan. And she went there and did a full photo shoot in the snow and whatnot. And just being able to give people that opportunity to do what they love, I think that's what I love the most about it. So, and then giving the riders a bit of a platform. We did a few new articles in there that just different format. And there's always things I want to keep changing with it. So it's it's always evolving, and that's kind of the interesting part about it is it's not static. So I find some of the things we do here, Transcan aside, can be a little like repetitive. But something like that is always going to be changing, and especially in the print world right now is. I don't think we could have picked a worse time to maybe get involved in a print magazine. There's paper shortages worldwide and whatnot, but if it's not challenging, I don't really feel like it's going to be worth my time. So
Hmm.
that's kind of the best part for me.
Yeah, and speaking of dynamic things, there's always ways to bring the magazine online and do
Mm-hmm.
interactive media online so people can scroll and see
Yeah.
cool engaging things about Canadian moto. So I think it doesn't stop at the magazine. It goes on this podcast, social
Mm-hmm.
media. Like there's a great platform for Canadian moto, in all these different avenues.
I agree. And then finding just people who want to be a part of it, who bring a different kind of dynamic to it that hasn't been there before, like yourself. And there's a few other ones that we're kind of talking to right now. And I I think it's exciting, and I love the idea of giving people an opportunity to get their name out there or have a job or just develop their skills in a capacity and be proud of what they do and uh, make a living out of it in some way, shape, or form, right? And whether it complements what they're already doing or if it's, this is it. I don't know. I love that because I don't feel like we need any more opportunities. Um, I just love opening the door for other people. So
Yeah, that's really cool, right? Like how that perspective or dynamic changes over the course of your life, right? Like,
mm-hmm.
someone like me, young adult, looking at all these different ways to be involved in a sport, to progressing to a place where you can give kids like me,
Mm-hmm.
uh, that opportunity. That's really cool to hear that you're interested in doing that, not just putting out this magazine.
Yeah, no, that I feel like that would be too um it would lack depth to do it that way for me personally anyways. So and I don't want to keep doing the same thing forever. I want to be able to create things in a way that it can transition to the next person, right? Or it creates new opportunities for other people. So I'm always looking for what the next project is, and there's an ever evolving 2, 3, 5 year plan. So
That's
not on
awesome.
paper. Brett always wants it on paper, but it's in my head. It exists.
So, Melody, in conclusion here, what are your overall goals for the sport and yourself in the sport moving forward?
I feel for the goals for me in this sport are to kind of align with what I just said is to keep giving people that platform to showcase the things they want to achieve, the things they have achieved, that moment on the stage where they can be acknowledged by, us, the industry, their loved ones, have that picture taken to come here and, feel like what they've worked hard for all year is worth it, whether or not they end up first or they just, DNF all the motos. It's just, I really want to just give people that moment to celebrate the good choices they've made and to get to where they are. And that's it for me. That's the number one.
That's awesome.
What was
Well,
the second question?
what are your goals for the sport as a whole? Looking at the trajectory of motocross in Canada,
Hmm.
what's your goal for that?
I'd love to see it keep growing. I just want to keep that momentum uh, that happened over the past 2 years to keep rolling. Maybe in a sustainable way. So it's not just, 2 years in and then people are off to the next thing. Um, and on a personal level, I'd love to see my daughter transition into something in a few years where maybe it's not trans cam, but she's already picking up on the skills on event planning and whatnot. And just giving her the courage and self-confidence to do these things, right? Like I love being in a position of, I don't want to say power, but of some authority within an industry that is male dominated. And I like being potentially a role model for her or the other young females we have working for us. They see me at my absolute worst, and then they get to see me do really cool things like this as well. So um, I just want to keep giving opportunities in many different ways to anyone that needs one. So
Absolutely. Keep those strong voices going, right?
yeah, that's it.
Well, Melody, thank you so much for joining me. This has been fun.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm super glad you had me, and I appreciate the time.
Thank you. And we'll
You're
see you
welcome.
all in 2 weeks for another episode of The Female Perspective from MXP Magazine.